Good afternoon again. My name is Abi Baker and I'm a pianist, violinist and clarinetist, and I'm also a trained therapist and life coach, and I'm the research assistant to Dr. Claire Castle, who's carrying out this research. Yeah, I think that's everything.
Great. I see.
My name is Shanson. I'm a founder, one of the founders of the Baluji Music Foundation. And in this context, I would say that I am the biggest producer of performances by professional blind musicians in the world.
Hi everyone, I am far less accomplished than the two people who've come before. I'm Dr. Claire Castle. I work for the research charity Bravo Victor, which works in the sight loss sector and also in the military veteran sector, so we've got some crossover there. Obviously my work here today is with visually impaired musicians, so I am running the Blind to the Facts 2023 survey, which is currently online. I would just like to say thank you to anyone and everyone who's done it so far. It's hugely appreciated, and hopefully from this we'll get a few more responses. So yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is John Shortell and I'm Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion for the Musicians Union.
Hello everybody, my name is Steve Stanley, and I think I've been invited to this panel because I'm one of the few that can remember back to 1995, it's my place there, my place of fame. And I'm currently an Executive Director at Access Creative College.
And the different locations, they are called my bosses.
Hello, I'm Victoria Oruwari and I'm the coordinator for the panel today, moderator for the panel today. Get your words right, Victoria. I am a soprano, classically trained, and I've been working with Inner Vision Orchestra since its conception. I'm also a certified psychotherapist, and I'm looking forward to sharing what I know about music and visually impaired people, and also hearing reviews. We're going to come into the discussion because we're looking at the way visually impaired people across the UK music industry have been impacted by music and visual impairment and inclusion, or the lack of it. And the aim of this research is to drive inclusion and greater employment for blind and visually impaired musicians in the mainstream music industry. Because right now we have amazing orchestras like Inner Vision Orchestra, Power Orchestra, Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. Well, why have separate orchestras for disabled people when we're not living in apartheid anymore? We should be working together as professional musicians that we all are. And that's the aim of today's discussion, to go through all the reasons why this can't happen or isn't happening, and what we can do to increase the possibility of greater employment and opportunities for blind and visually impaired musicians in the United Kingdom music industry. So the first question, the first Blind to the Facts survey, which led to the creation of the Baluji Music Foundation and the Inner Vision Orchestra for blind musicians, took place in 1995. What is the landscape for 2023 like compared to 28 years ago for the blind and visually impaired musicians working today? I mean, from my point of view, I feel like there's a huge change at the moment because of the Equality Act that states that equal opportunities should be given to everyone, regardless of their age, sex, religion, disability, sexuality, gender. So because of that, we have the confidence to apply to every organization or company for a job, knowing that if we're good for the job, we should be given it. And the question is, is that always happening, and if not, why? Are there any other pointers?
I think certainly in the last 4 to 5 years, the conversation around disability has changed somewhat in the music industry, across the music industry. So I've seen more of a willingness of organisations willing to have that conversation and discuss practical challenges to inclusion and what we can do about them. I think there's been technological advancements as well that have enabled access to music education or a career in the music industry for blind and visually impaired musicians. And surprisingly, I thought lockdown was really useful to have those conversations, because let's be honest, none of us were going anywhere. We weren't doing anything. So I had access to lots of organisations that I'd never had access to before to have conversations about diversity and inclusion and come up with some strategic aims for those organisations to enable the inclusion of disabled or visually impaired musicians. I mean, it was probably one of the only positive things to come out at that time, but there was time and space for us to think about the way we do things and hit pause and think, is there a different way we can do things, a better way that's more inclusive? So in those ways, I think the landscape has changed somewhat. I've definitely noticed a shift in awareness of disability and visually impaired and blind musicians. But what I will say is those attitudinal barriers still exist about what visually impaired and blind musicians can and can't do, or disabled musicians more widely. And I think, in a way, attitudinal barriers are much harder to overcome than physical barriers. We can address physical barriers in a number of ways, but attitudinal barriers takes time to break down those attitudes. And I know they still exist because of our members and the Disabled Members Network at the MU. I have conversations with them regularly, and these are some of the issues that we come across where some organisations or venues or promoters aren't willing to have those conversations because they might think disabled musicians are too much trouble to meet the access requirements or too much trouble to employ. So while there is a change in the conversation, we've still got a long, long way to go, I would say.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we want to produce Stevie Wonder. Baluji Wonder is not enough.
That would be great. Yeah. Thank you so much. Continuing with the theme of progress, what advice would you give to promoters or employers who are trying to include blind and visually impaired people but are not sure how to go about it?
Can I answer that question also and contribute to the first one as well? Sorry.
Yeah.
Is that okay? So, completely agree with what John's saying. I actually met...
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I can. So my name is Steve Stanley. And basically I met Baluji and Linda actually 1980s. And they're still arguing today, actually. Still a lot changed there, actually. But when we first met, I mean, Baluji was one of our sort of world arts and technology specialists, so we had a wide range of world arts and technology. This was in Hackney Community College, which in the old days we started up in Woodbury Down. Baluji, we were talking about it earlier, although we don't have data going back to that time, we think Baluji was the only blind teacher in the college at that time, and I don't think we had any blind students. Correct me if I'm wrong, and Lee would know, I know she's got a very good memory for that sort of thing. I looked at that I talked to some of our specialists in Actors Creative College, which is over 7 cities across the country today, where, as I said, I'm director there. And we do cater for a wide range of SEND, so around 1,450 students with, as I said, a wide range of special educational needs and disabilities. So of those, though, there were no blind students, and 21 with some form of vision impairment. So you could argue, no blind teachers, so you could argue from that perspective, not much change there. So I think that in one sense, change in terms of they're achieving very well, they're gaining access, but we're not getting enough blind students through the door. So the question for me is why?
So in keeping, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. In keeping with the theme of what progress has been made and what advice to give agents and promoters who want to employ disabled people, blind and partially sighted people, and don't know how to go about it, I think it's important that agents are aware of the Equality Act and are sure that when they are putting blind, visually impaired people forward, they are mindful of reasons companies are giving when they're not taking them on, but also what would help agents more if they know about all the support that's available for blind and visually impaired people. So for instance, access to work, which offers support by giving the blind person a personal assistant to assist them to get to venues, because travelling can be a huge barrier when it comes to employing blind musicians, because we have to carry instruments. A lot of people drive, people take public transport. I actually have an anecdote of one event I was asked to go and sing at, and I just blithely went, oh yeah, of course I'm going to come. I mean, I can get everywhere in London, right? And on that day I was trying to get there, and I realised the journey was going to take 2 trains, 1 bus, and a 20-minute walk. And I thought, at the end of that, I'm not going to be able to sing, so I ended up taking a taxi. Cut a long story short, when I got my taxi bill, it was like £60. Now that's like a fifth of what I was being paid for the day. And then coming back, luckily I had my PA with me. I thought, I'm not going to give £60 to a taxi driver again. So we walked to the station, which took like 45 minutes, and we had to walk through a graveyard. That was scary. So it's important for people to be aware that if you're going to employ a visually impaired person or blind person, please put transport fees aside from the fee of the person that's performing, because if I could drive, that wouldn't have been an issue. So that's the other answer I got for the question.
Can I answer that question as well? I mean, I completely agree about access to work, even though anyone who's applied for it knows it's a nightmare to fill out the application and go through that process.
Can I just say, with the survey at the moment, we've looked at the initial data, and one of the things that's come out already is that the least satisfaction in terms of inclusion and accessibility is the effort and the time it takes to apply for access to work. That's the big finding at the moment. That's what people are least satisfied with.
Yeah, a lot of our members who apply to access to work, it takes months for the application to go through to fill out the process. It's something that the Musicians Union are lobbying government on at the moment for a streamlined process for access to work, because it doesn't work at the moment for disabled musicians. So I'd definitely say look into that, and if you've got the time and the energy, I would definitely apply for that. One other thing that we do at the MU, we've got a disabled members network, and there was a problem with communicating access requirements to venues, promoters, organisations. So we work with our disabled members to create an access rider, and it's just like any rider that a musician would send ahead of the gig, but it details the access needs. So a really simple document where you can put all your access needs on it, your access requirements, and send that to the venue ahead of turning up. And then we've got all that information in one place to have a conversation with you about what you need to do your job. It also gives you backup if the venue or the promoter won't meet your access needs, and then you've got it written down in the email chain of that conversation. So if you are having those problems, then you can come back to the MU and we can have that conversation as your trained union on your behalf. One other thing I would add is about job advertisements. So we see a lot of this, especially in music education, of the requirement for a driving licence for music teachers. Or, as we've just said, you can probably get everywhere on public transport anyway, so why is it necessary to have a driving licence? So if there's things like that, it's reviewing your job applications and seeing, is this accessible, is that completely necessary, or is there another way you can do this? Again, if you didn't drive but you needed to get somewhere and you wasn't benefit of access to it, you can use that fund to pay for taxis, as we've just heard. So we're challenging things like that on a daily basis about, like, is this inclusive, is that completely necessary, what more can we do to open up these sectors to a wider range of musicians?
Abi, would you like to say something about
Yes, sure. Okay, so I have another anecdote, which is that, and you wouldn't necessarily think of this, but my partner, who is also a fabulous musician himself, has to get Uber taxis back from his gigs quite often because they're very, very late at night, and obviously no public transport, and he works a lot in Sussex. And the driver turned up, everything was fine. Turned out he was deaf, so there was Twin who was totally blind, the driver who was totally deaf, he couldn't communicate with him at all. So he was just praying that this taxi would take him where he needed to go because he couldn't say anything to him. So that's another thing that needs to be considered, is the ability to the driver to communicate with us effectively in terms of where we're going, and to be able to take directions because we can't see where they're taking us. There was another instance where I was coming back from a gig late at night with a couple of my fellow musicians, and the driver dropped, we didn't know this, and he dropped the person that lived further away off first. And we only noticed when she looked out the window and said, "Oh, I live here." I was like, oh, okay. We had to drop us off later, having gone past our house literally about 20 minutes before, which we didn't know. So, that's something.
One of the things that I think would help would be if we need a way of making blind musicians visible to people who want to employ them. Because earlier Steve was saying that they would welcome having blind students, but blind students don't know where they are. And a lot of the members of the Inner Vision Orchestra, I mean, we met them by bumping into people in the street and talking to them. So that is a very big problem. And for example, in Islington, there is no blind association, so there's no...
There are no blind people in Islington.
So there's no way of locating people. And I also thought that if there was a kind of shadowing scheme, so that musicians could shadow, and not only musicians, but sound engineers and people with other skills, because the more visible and more normal it is to have blind people in a working environment, that has a knock-on effect, just like it did when there weren't any women in the workplace, etc.
Linda, you know what would be a really good example to share is the work at South Bank, done with the blind and visually impaired buskers. Do you want to talk a bit about?
Yes, well, we're very interested in integrating our musicians in the mainstream. Our success will be when we no longer have to exist and go and do something else. So we have started 2 schemes. One is with Live Music Now, which has taken on 12 of our musicians in their circuit, which is great. And also opening up the opportunity for blind musicians to busk with the South Bank busking scheme, which is great. And we would really, really like London Transport to open up. So in the winter, people can perform inside as well. Yeah, in the underground. We will be having a Q&A with the audience very soon.
So we'll move on to the next question.
Can I say something? I have been talking about visually impaired people not visible. I have put my hands up so many times.
Well, because no, it's actually because you're not on the panel, and only people that are on the panel are allowed to speak right now. And I think what Linda was trying to say is that you will get your chance when we throw a question to the audience.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sorry.
I was suggesting something very important, but never mind.
So, to question number 3, I will be back with you, Baluji, when we're done with the 5 questions. Question number 3. How do you think blind and partially sighted musicians can help themselves in this current climate of, different ways of advertising that may not necessarily be as accessible as it could be? Abby, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. So, sorry, this is Abi speaking again.
Yeah.
I think I would say to blind and visually impaired people, just be flexible in terms of what you're prepared to do. Obviously, don't do stuff that you don't want to do, but if you've got talent at all and you enjoy doing things, then just try and go for it, and don't be afraid. Don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't do it or you can't do it, because you never know what opportunities it could lead to. So in that way, just be flexible, be open-minded, dream big and that kind of thing as well. From my own experience, back in 1995, sort of going back to the first question really, I was 16 doing my GCSEs, trying to kid myself that I was going to be some kind of concert pianist, which in my heart I didn't really want to do, because I wanted to do more variety, more different things, variety, which I'm very definitely doing now. But it took a lot of courage and an awful lot of determination and people believing in me and me believing in myself to get where I am today. So yeah, I would say just really go for it.
Thank you, Abby. What I'll also add to that is that be so unapologetic when you advertise yourself, because what I mainly did was tell every single person I bumped into, even if it was on the street and they were just casually helping me across the road, hey, do you know I sing? I've got a degree in this and I can sing. And one day it was actually one of the gigs, I got a really amazing gig from talking to the cleaner in my church who told someone, and that they've heard of someone who can sing. And I got to sing at this really amazing dinner party that was organised because they were looking for a singer. They didn't know how to go about doing that. And then I also have on the footer of my email what I do and how to contact me and my website. So it's really, really important for visually impaired people to find someone to help them create a website. This is one way that you can be on the map when people do a Google search, and use very strong keywords like blind, visually impaired, singer, because I actually got to fly to New Zealand to sing somewhere because those words were on my website and they were looking for blind singer London, and I came up. So it's very important to kind of use keywords and things like that. So we'll move on to the next question without further...
Hold on a minute, Victoria. I just want to say something, that success everywhere depends on networking. And particularly, I think, in the music business, where there's sort of schmoozing going on before and after gigs. And this is a situation that is particularly challenging if you can't see. And it's challenging also if you don't have business cards, if you don't have a website, because if you do meet someone, how are they going to remember who you are and what your number is? So I would advise all musicians, whether they're blind or not, to have that. And we will be having a networking event here afterwards, after the Q&A. And please encourage interaction of the sightless people in the room, and encourage them to interact with you and with each other. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you so much, Linda. We'll move on to the next question. So we're definitely here to focus on the survey. So I'd like to ask Claire, Dr. Claire, to talk to us a bit more about the aim of the survey in just a little more depth.
Sure, I can do that. So, like I've already said, thank you so much for those who have already taken part in the survey. I'm always a little bit apprehensive when I log on to the our survey platform and check how many responses we've had, and it's always lovely when you go on, you've had 10 more, 20 more, and the numbers going up. So thank you so much. Just to give you a bit of context, we've already talked about the original survey that was run back in 1995, so it was called Blind to the Facts, run by John Ludlow back in 1995, and this is an updated version of that. And I think the exciting part of this is that whilst in 1995 we were asking musicians what their experiences were, this time around we're really asking for everyone's experiences. So it's not just musicians, we're also talking, Linda spoke about other professionals, so you've got sound producers, people that are taking on those kind of subsidiary roles in the sector as well. We really want to hear from those people who have sight loss as well. And as well as that, we've got the other side of the survey, which is for employers, stakeholders, providers, people in positions to actually make change in organisations that enable blind and partially sighted musicians and professionals to get employment in those areas. So yeah, there's lots of different sections of the survey for those different groups. So that's a really important update. In order to initiate change, we really want those employers, providers, stakeholders on side. We want to understand what it is that is maybe causing them to think that they can't employ someone with a vision impairment. Maybe they don't understand access for work. One of the main reasons that people have given so far who are employers, providers, is that they simply don't come across people with sight loss working in their area. That is nothing to do with them not being inclusive, that is just the situation within the sector, and that's the whole point of running this survey, is to make sure that that is not the case in 10 years' time, in another 20 years' time, because that was certainly the case back in 1995, and I think that's probably something that hasn't changed an awful lot. Even with access to work, we've already said that's still problematic, people can't apply for it, it's not doing what it needs to do. We also said earlier about kind of the landscape changing, and I think yes, it obviously has an awful lot, but also we've still got similar issues to what we had back then for blind and partially sighted musicians. I spoke to someone who did the survey over the phone a few days ago with me, and they said technology is absolutely great and it's wonderful for people that can use it, but they were not a confident technology user, and they made the point that social media is not particularly handy if you're not confident with it, and if that is how a lot of musicians are today promoting themselves, getting their music out there, that's cutting off potentially a lot of area promotion for that person who is not confident using social media. And we've got the same issue of representation that we had back in 1995, so issues with managers, promoters, agents just simply not taking on musicians who have visual impairment, and the majority of people would like to have an agent, like back in 1995, and just can't get one, or don't know about how to go about doing so. So yeah, there's lots of questions in the survey about experiences, so lived experience, lots of open-ended questions because we really don't want to shoehorn people's experience into tick boxes. So there are tick boxes so that we can provide numbers. Numbers are really important for evidence. It's what Lindsay, Baluji really wanted. You know, you want that hard evidence, but we also want story, lived experiences, anecdotes, like Abi's given us on the panel. So yeah, I'm quite passionate about it, as you can tell. My background's in music, and it's been wonderful to see musicians here today, but obviously Linda said the point is that we're here because there's an issue, and that's what we're trying to address with this survey. So any sharing is really appreciated. Sorry.
Thank you, Claire. I just wanted to ask one more question. Can you give us some insights into how it has gone so far? Like, what sort of people have you heard from? I mean, you said some things, but were there any surprises?
I mean, surprises, not so much. It's always slightly worrying maybe when you see the same issues coming up 28 years later. So things like travel, transport, access to those things being an issue still. Yeah, so I wouldn't say necessarily surprising, probably more worrying. There's a surprising amount of unpaid work going on. That's probably not surprising to the musicians in the room. I think it might be a musician-wide thing, but I think particularly for people with sight loss, that is obviously how they're trying to go about establishing themselves.
Okay.
And there's an awful lot of people doing unpaid work, obviously because they can't get the paid work.
Yeah, that's awful. Yeah, and what about accessibility? When you were doing the survey, did accessibility impact people's ability to engage with it and your ability to get the information you needed?
Sure. So, yes, always issues of accessibility. We're using an online survey platform which has an accessibility theme and, funnily enough, isn't accessible. So we've been tackling that. We took the survey offline briefly. I know that there's someone in the room here that did it taking the survey offline, then couldn't get back in, but we resolved that. And I'm hoping that changes to the question format that were done last week have also improved the experience of filling it in. We should say that you can talk to me over the phone if you're interested in doing it and don't want to do it online. Some people just don't like online surveys. And there's also a Word version that's now been developed for BI musicians. So there's lots of different ways to access it, but yes, even with survey testing, there's still accessibility issues.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. It's very helpful to hear all of this. So I would like to remind each and every one of us in this room, we're here because of this survey, and the survey can only work if we all fill it. So please, whatever we do at the end of this, before you get your glass of Prosecco, fill the survey. I think you're paying